Shalom, everyone on MTV Israel. I'm Taylor Swift, and here's my new video.
Something we must all come to terms with if we are to be a serious and self-aware film culture is that our film culture is of a ludicrous minority among the greater world of people who discuss and watch movies. This is nothing to be ashamed of, but it is something to be wary, especially when conceptualizing, interacting with, and generally attempting to regard what the actual popular archetypal mantras are and how cinema is really perceived. Sincerity, the coveted noun. Online you see it everywhere. This idea that we as a culture have become poisoned by irony and require a full detox of detachment in favor of sincerity. And how do we find such terms and conditions? Broadly speaking, it seems to be an embrace of the maudlin and universally obvious. Stories that arrange specificity then resort to corny aphorisms. The "if it makes you cry, then it must be good" gold standard, which negates the other ways in which film can work on a viewer, such as considering, pondering, or simply thinking in general. Film, like all art, often operates on emotional frequencies, but an astute viewer should be able to conceptualize those emotions into aesthetic, narrative, and cultural contexts. This obsession with sincerity as an end-all be-all homogenizes not only all art into narrative payoff, but flattens the ways in which art can even operate. When David Lynch sadly passed away last year, social media was flooded with mourning for days, in which, among both the intelligent and banal statements put forward, there was one recurring theme that I just couldn't reconcile. This concept that Lynch was an avowed follower of sincerity. How could it be that someone who had waded through the exploits of Frank Booth and Blue Velvet, or the assassin killing the fat lady in Mulholland Drive, or let alone half of Twin Peaks, have misinterpreted Lynch so brutally? It comes down to the way people have been taught to perceive him. Lynch, clearly a funny guy, knew that his voice and general demeanor had inherent comedic value and was not shy about flaunting it, especially as he got older and his output slowed drastically, and therefore reminders of his perverted and often jaundiced vision of the world. It allowed a crop of young people who have little to no historical curiosity to receive works such as Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive unburdened by the decades of discussion and mixed reception to his artistry. He was the funny man who made good movies, and henceforth he was somehow achingly sincere. May David Lynch inspire us all to embrace sweeping sincerity in all we do and see and create.
Let's fuck! I'll fuck anything that moves!
My point in bringing up Lynch is not to decry him as some sort of hack, quite the opposite. He was a genius and managed to put forward several of the greatest films of the past 50 years. What I am putting forward is that these films are not so great because they can be read as simply sincere. In fact, the often dubious relationship Lynch has to his ironies and heart and slab sentimentality is the tension that makes his work so special. Take the ending of Blue Velvet. Jeffrey throughout the film has been fighting this perception of himself that his sexual desires make him an evil person. Said anxieties are manifested in Frank Booth, a sexually violent force that represents everything Jeffrey imagines his sadomasochism makes him. The issue that goes nearly unspoken is that between Dorothy, the altar of his desires, and Sandy, the good girl he should actually be with, he only wants to have sexual relations with the former, while only being able to envision a future with the latter. So what must Jeffrey do? Well, he has to shoot the manifestation of his desires, and then swiftly attempt to compartmentalize everything dark and disturbing to set everything in suburbia back to where it ought to be. The line between what is supposedly ironic and sincere here is not so cut and dry. Lynch's admiration for suburbia is real, but he's also aware that it is in part a facade. When Jeffrey is seen laying down his lazy sun-kissed glory, only to go inside and see a robin viciously holding on to the evil bugs from the beginning, Lynch is aware we know this is corny and too perfect. It's not totally sincere, it's a joke, but it's a communicative one. It tells us something about how we all suppress and attempt to arrange our lives artificially in conquest of a goal. Jeffrey may never, fuck Sandy, or maybe he does perfunctorily, but he knows he'd rather do that than indulge in Dorothy again. And tomorrow he'll go out and vote for Reagan's second term. None of this is necessarily sincere in the way so many people imagine that word. It's a real communication of ideas and emotions that uses formal and narrative games to make you feel and think. It's beyond sincerity, it's genius.
When I was 15, my mama told me that pretty soon I'd be starting to think about sex, and I should tell her before I did anything about it.
But honey, I thought you told me your Uncle Pooch raped you when you was 13.
That's true.
Now, why is this idea so popular? Well, if you go online, you'll see that many of the people who repeat this are themselves indulged in several niches in that way so many young people are. They like anime, comic books, streaming television, movies, romance novels, YouTube videos, what have you. What binds them together is an unobserved relationship with them, and because they do not seek to imagine their connection to these things through any lens that would ask anything of them, they boil down their fictional archetypes into very broad, easy to understand ideas. Sometimes they themselves speak ironically, and sometimes they themselves speak sincerely. Therefore, these are the two tenors in which all art operates. Never mind the fact that if you go through the effort of making something as cumbersome as a film, especially if it's of a certain avant-garde or generally arty scale, then the vision behind it might as well be sincerely motivated no matter how many games are played or ironic ploys used. People like this can only imagine artists coming from some ether of creativity in which all of us have access, from independent cartoonists drafting comic books to the biggest studios pumping out $400 million crap into the multiplexes. It's indicative of a populace who not only refuses to acknowledge individuals as artists, but receive different mediums as such. Because when everything becomes as broad as media or content, then of course art can be boiled down to terms as useless as sincere. Next time you see someone espousing this, ask them what the art is actually sincere about. Many films come out all the time that lay out concepts, themes, and formal ideas without being sincerely interested in such things nor their implications. Recently I saw Rob Reiner's Misery, and I'm sure the anxieties and tensions constructed through that movie are sincere, but is his interest in literature and fan culture and the place the con character occupies within the greater literary world and the psychology that comes along with that? No. Which is why it's a facile movie, but of course, if it makes you cry, then it must be sincere, right?